Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Oh, right. Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Roots for the Forum Resist, Ending the Criminalization of the Poor and Communities of Color. What an exciting space with so many people packed in, a lot of energy. We're just going to ask to fit in as many people as you can, that if it's possible for you to scooch over, sit on the floor, stand, we ask that you do that today. Thanks everyone for coming and for bringing your hearts and your minds and your energy into the space. Huge thanks to Michaela Sims of the Spark Teacher Education Institute and Mark Levy-Reyes for collaborating with the Root on this forum. And we'll do logistics first and then introductions. We also have been working a lot on accessibility for Root events, and we have ASL interpreters here today, which is amazing. And we also are working on a fragrance-free policy at the Root so that it can be truly accessible for people who have chemical sensitivities. There is information on the table over there and also on our website to find out how you can support this being a fragrance-free space. We ask that you check that out for the next time that you come. And we have BCTV here today filming. This program will air on BCTV. And we also have live streaming. There's a computer right here. It's filming the event, and it's up on the web right now, so people who aren't here can watch the event, which is really amazing. We'll see if that actually works. This is the first time we've tried that. And hi, everybody. And we also have Kira taking photos and doing filming. Hi, Kira. If you do not want your photo up on any publicity, please let myself or other rooters know, and we'll make sure that your photo is not seen on the web. Also, this is a volunteer-run event, and thank you so much to all the volunteers who have put time, energy, heart, hands into making this event happen. We do want to thank panelists, the theater group, childcare providers today. So we are going to be passing around donation baskets at the end, and we ask that you give generously. We also are going to provide information about how you can give to the Black Lives Matter campaign, and we ask that you give to those organizations directly. We have the agenda over here. The way that this few hours is going to go, we're going to have a film clip setting the context. It'll be a theater presentation. We're going to have someone talk about the abolition perspective. And there'll be a panel discussion with question and answer. And then we'll talk about action and have a closing. So we do have a packed agenda, and we can make it happen. Cool. So let's do some introductions. Michaela, do you want to introduce yourself?
Just my name?
And why it is that you're here today and collaborating on this forum.
I'm Michaela, as you know. I think that this is a perfect positive channel for all the anger that I've been feeling. It's been a challenge for me to sit still at work or at home or anywhere because it's such a challenging time in history, and this baby on my back is in so much danger. And yeah, that's all I can say without spilling over, so I'll stop there.
And Mark.
Sure. My name is Mark Levy-Reyes. I am a civil rights lawyer by trade. I'm here primarily because things really are not going to change unless the community gets involved, and I want to be part of any event in which the community is coming together to talk about these really important issues. And only through actions of a community can we overcome this kind of inherent institutional racism that permeates all institutions that we have.
And my name is Angela Brookfield, and I'm one of the Root Collective members and founders, and I'm going to ask the other Root members to raise their hands or stand up. Mel Motel and Alex Fisher Sheila Linton is not able to be here today. She is at a funeral for a friend of hers who died last week. And so she's really disappointed she can't be here today, and sends her love. She's here with us in spirit. And her friend who died was a person of color, and she asked that we take a moment of silence right now for all people of color who have died at the hands of systemic violence. Thoughts and love are with Sheila today and her friends and family as they gather to remember Robbie. So the Root Social Justice Center is an office collective by day and a community space for community groups to use who are doing social justice work evenings and weekends. If you want to know more about the Root or the projects that the four of us are working on, there's information on the shelf by the door, and you can check out our website as well. When we started the Root a year and a half ago, at the time there was a national conversation about Trayvon Martin and his murder at the hands of George Zimmerman. And at that time we were saying, we wish that there was a space like this that people could come together and share and talk and move forward and have it spur action. And now at this moment, a year and a half later, when there's a national conversation happening about race, we feel really honored and humbled that we are able to be here and be this kind of place for conversation and hopefully catalyst for action. So thank you all for joining us for that conversation and being a part of the movement. Great. Thank you all for being here today. We're gonna start with a film clip.
So just to set a little bit of context what we're thinking, I think in this current time in history, the assault on the poor and people of color seems more intense. And really, I think it's become more visible for all of us to see. And to really think about that this has been happening since 1492. And right now, what we see on the streets is another eruption, another calling out for civil rights of people in this country. And right now, we're gonna focus a lot on race, but we are very clear that race and class are inextricably linked. So when you're talking about race, you're also talking about class, because people living in poverty here are just as targeted as people of color, no matter what they look like. So that's kind of it, and I hope you're as touched by this video as we all have been.
Larger issues that we've been talking about now for last week, last month, last year, and sadly for decades.
Get your cake up. The motto in the streets is you eat or you get ate up. Straight up. You tired of waiting? Go get your weight up. It's tired of waiting for reparations to pay us. Screaming Jesus to save us. And if the rate we get for saver, but that's just another trick to enslave us. Push the minimum wages. Put our fathers up in them cages. Then watch our mothers struggle to raise us. But my ambition won't let me live in this poor condition that doesn't care about color, creed, or your religion. Preach politicians gotta listen to opposition. From my position, we still ain't got a pot to piss in. From my position, we still ain't got a pot to piss in.
Allah said, save the babies from the cold, pour wisdom in their cups till the truth overflows. Still knowledge is that bread that keeps us well fed. Oh, child religion will not bring us satisfaction without action. disagree with me. God is not a mystery, there's nowhere in history that you can show and prove to me. Still you face these, you're not connected me religiously. I'm G.O.D. to infinity, for real.
Right now, unfortunately, we're seeing too many instances where people just do not have confidence in what
Poor reparations, the Bush administration, inequality, martial law, segregation, falsehood, false teaching, false education. Now's the time for us to come amongst this nation. They deceiving us, they don't believe in us. They believe in that cream like Julius Caesar. I'm like Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X with the heels, ripping the chains off the remains of all of the leaders. Never worship an image of you with swine eaters. I'm on the back of the bus with two fine Adidas. We in the jungle of life, but never jungle fever. I'm God body all day long. Spiritual life lessons that I recite in the song. Trying to wake up everybody, can we all get along? For my people that's out there persevering through the storm. Black fist, Staten Island, stand up, stand strong. Penetrate through the gate and bring the clan along.
Wake up and realize the times that we living in. The world is getting more iller than ever. Thought we was chilling, striving change for the better, but it was a dream like Martin Luther. He had a vision that could move mountains, protect one another. That's worth of my brother Malcolm. Assalamu alaikum, assalam. We want justice, fully supposed to protect and serve, and then they shoot us down like wild animals. The nerve of them cold-hearted killers with blue suits, slaying our black youth. The earth costs more blood as being spilled. We need a solution fast. This shall all will. Let me educate and translate it, meaning God's will. It goes rolling together how we are. To stand with a plan, divided we down the fall. And that's the Willie Lynch tactics that separated the masses, taught us all to think backwards.
which is incumbent upon all of us as Americans, regardless of race, region, faith, that we recognize this is an American problem, not just a black problem, or a brown problem, an American problem. This is an American problem. Anybody in this country is not being treated equally under the law, that's a problem.
So we've hit capacity, which is awesome, but it also means we're turning people away, which is not so awesome. So the folks who are arriving now are going to try to head to Marlboro Grad Center into the main room and live stream it there and have their own version of this.
So you're going to hear the words racism, institutional racism, and white supremacy today, and so we wanted to have some definitions so people know that we have a common definition. So if we move over just a little bit. So when we say racism, we mean race prejudice plus power. And we see racism as being many things, not just personal or interpersonal racism, which is often what gets focused on. And we're going to use the analogy of an iceberg, which isn't perfect, but in many ways helps us understand what racism looks like. So often we focus on this tip of the iceberg, which is personal and interpersonal racism, but in reality it's so much more. It's a huge structure which is underwater, which is sometimes hard to see and doesn't get talked about. So just to give some examples, using the context of Officer Wilson shooting Michael Brown 6 times and killing him, and then Michael Brown's body being left in the street for 4.5 hours. We use that as an example, and one example of interpersonal racism would be Officer Wilson saying that Mike Brown was like a demon. And the cultural belief or myth that's under the water that we don't see, as well as this belief that racism is over. That people, we hear this a lot right now, right? That racism doesn't exist. That's the thing of the past. And this situation is not about racism. This is about Michael Brown being a criminal and equating black with criminal. So this being an example of cultural racism, the beliefs and myths that our society holds. And upholding that is institutional racism. Examples of that being the criminal justice system failing to indict Officer Wilson. And this isn't just this one case, right? This is happening to so many people. Here's just taking what's happened in New York City in the last 15 years. From 1999 to 2014, 179 New York citizens were killed by on-duty police. That's been recorded. I'm sure there are many more that weren't recorded. Of those, there were only 3 indictments. And of those 3 indictments, there was 1 conviction and no incarceration. 27% of those 179 people were unarmed, and 86% were black or Hispanic. So we can see from those numbers that this is a systemic problem. And that's just one institution, that's in the criminal justice system. Another example would be in the media focusing on rioting. So the media is not talking about this. The media is not talking about this. The media is looking at the rioting that's happening. And underneath that big iceberg, we have this system that makes this whole thing happen. And it's a system of white supremacy, which is historically based, institutionally perpetuated system of exploitation and oppression of people of color by white people to maintain and defend a system of wealth, power, and privilege. So much time goes into chipping away at the top of this iceberg and looking at personal and interpersonal racism. But for that to go away, we really need to look at this whole system. We could talk about this for at least a whole day, if not a week. But this is just so we are on the same page about what we're talking about today when we say white supremacy and institutional racism. All right. So we're going to have a theater group come up, the Spark Theater Collective. And they're going to demonstrate this for us.
So, as Angela said, we're the Spark Theater Collective. We wrote this piece a few months ago in relation to what happened in Gaza, or what continues to happen in Gaza, and we hope that we can provide connections to Ferguson and beyond. Here we are
in the United States of Capital.
We are here in Brattleboro, Vermont. Who is dangerous?
Who is dangerous?
Who is dangerous?
Is it you?
Is it you?
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 Hi, kids. I'm your local police officer, and I'm here with a friendly reminder to look both ways before you cross the street.
Vamos, chiquita!
Stop! Show me your papers.
What is the purpose of a prison?
Evictions,
Debt.
hunger. Every time I try to get up,
We keep you down!
They told us it's for criminals. Blood, sweat, land, labor, profit. Who benefits?
Prisoner 113, cha-ching, cha-ching. Prisoner 242, cha-ching, cha-ching. Prisoner 674, cha-ching, cha-ching.
They told us prisons are to keep us safe. Blood, sweat, land, labor, profit. Imagine we are on the streets of Gaza.
Who is dangerous?
Who is dangerous?
The sleeping children?
The mothers?
The fathers?
Open up! Aya!
They told us it's to keep Israelis safe. Blood, sweat, land, labor, profit. What is the purpose of the prison of Gaza? Every time we try to resist,
You will stay down!
they told us it's to protect Israelis. Blood, sweat, land, labor, profit. Who benefits? And the occupation, and the siege, and the occupation. They told us it's about democracy. Blood, sweat, land, labor, profit. What is the world we want?
At first, they came for the communists.
And I did not speak up because I was not a communist.
And then they came for the trade unionists.
And I did not speak up.
Because I was not a trade unionist.
And then they came for the Jews.
And I did not speak up because I was not a Jew.
And then they came for the Palestinians, the immigrant children, and the people of Ferguson. And we all stood up. What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Justice! When do we want it? Now!
Thank you so much, street theater folks, who are now called the Spark Theater Collective. Thank you so much. My name is Mel, and I'm one of the members of the Root Collective here, and I'm really grateful for Angela for starting to set the context, talking about racism and sort of the many levels of racism. And I want to set the context a little bit more before we get into our panel conversation by talking a bit about prison abolition, which is the perspective that the Root Collective comes from. And I want to share a little bit about what that means and give us a couple minutes to talk about it with each other. So, first of all, when you hear the term abolition, what do you think of? Shout it out.
Slavery.
Slavery. It's consensus. It's like a root meeting. We get consensus. So exactly, slavery. Millions of people of African descent separated from their communities and their homes and their humanity to labor for no wages for the profit of property owners and owners of capital. And I suspect when people in the modern prison abolitionist movement came up with that term, they had that word abolitionist and abolition in mind for a reason. The street theater performers asked, what is the purpose of a prison? Who benefits? And then they chanted blood, sweat, labor. How many people here were around when Robert King, former member of the Angola Three, came to speak in Brattleboro? All right, a few folks. So about 5 years ago, Robert King came to speak. And he had been a prisoner at Angola prison for about 30 years, and he was freed. And how many people have heard of Angola prison before? A lot of people. Okay, so it's otherwise known, well, it's another name for the Louisiana State Penitentiary. And Angola prison is literally built on a former slave plantation. You have the majority people of color prisoners laboring in the fields at Louisiana State Prison. So on one level, the connections between slavery and modern day prisons are very literal. Abolition is about seeing the connections between the historic institution of slavery and the prison system, deciding that it's unacceptable that this is still happening, and working to end a system of exploitation that profits off of the labor of people of color and poor folks. But besides the literal meaning of abolishing prisons and abolishing what is actually wage slavery in many prisons across the United States, prison abolitionists are talking about everything. We're talking about the whole system. And I want to share a quote from Angela Davis, who is one of the sort of at the forefront of the modern day prison abolitionist movement. She says, and those of us who identify as prison abolitionists, as opposed to prison reformers, make the point that oftentimes reforms create situations where mass incarceration becomes even more entrenched. And so therefore, we have to think about what in the long run will produce decarceration, fewer people behind bars, and hopefully eventually in the future, the possibility of imagining a landscape without prisons, where other means are used to address issues of harm, where social problems such as illiteracy and poverty do not lead vast numbers of people along a trajectory that leads to prison. So Angela Davis is saying a lot of things in that short period of time, and one of the things she's talking about is reform versus abolition. Now, one of the responses to the violence, the recent violence against so many people of color by police, is installing body cameras. And that's a reform that a lot of folks are thinking about taking. But the killing of Eric Garner was on tape. Probably millions of people saw that tape. And the person who killed him was still not indicted. So how powerful can reforms be in the face of a judicial system that allows that to happen? And abolitionists are just saying that reforms are not enough. Angela Davis goes on to say, how do we respond to the needs who are inside and at the same time begin a process of decarceration that will allow us to end this reliance on imprisonment as a default method of addressing, or not addressing really, major social problems? So prison abolition, not only is it not just about the physical prison building, it's about the whole system. It's about the institution of the criminal justice system and the white supremacy that upholds it. It's not about burning the prisons to the ground or flinging open the doors. It's about looking at the system, working to change the system, and creating a radically different way that we are with each other and a radically different way that we respond to harmful behavior, rather than criminalizing people, rather than locking people up. So it's about coming up with ways to move towards justice and healing without further separating people and continuing to create a permanent underclass of people who are criminalized and put in prisons. And so, I believe that we absolutely must support reforms, right? Because to not support reforms would be inhumane. If people are suffering now, some of these people that are suffering because of criminalization and incarceration are us, are our families, are our friends. We need to do things now, but as we're doing things, we need to have a vision for the future. And that's sort of what I'm hoping that we can go into the next portion of our time together with, is this idea of, as we talk about racism, as we talk about violence against people of color and poor communities, how do we use our imagination to think of radically different ways to deal with the problems in our society rather than pushing people away and locking people up. So I want to just take a couple minutes to do a pair and share. So everyone will turn to someone next to them. And I'm going to put out a couple of questions before we launch into the panel. And you can choose which question you want to do. So talk to your neighbor about whichever question you want. Thanks, Naomi. Naomi's going to write it. So I mentioned that, so one of the questions is, what are ways that we can respond to harm without criminalizing people? So using your imagination or things that you know about, because these things exist all throughout our community and our country. What are ways we can respond to harm without criminalizing people? And as we're heading into the panel, another question that you could ask yourself is, we need to go beyond the body cameras. The body cameras are good, or whatever forms that we institute to decrease harm are good, but I want to challenge you to go beyond those reforms. And so the other question is, what does beyond the body cameras mean to you? What does beyond the body cameras mean to you? So turn to your neighbor, take maybe 3 minutes or so to talk with each other. Choose what you want to talk about, or both, or something different. What are ways to respond to harm without criminalizing people? And what does beyond the body cameras mean to you? Before we move into our panel, I know I was part of a very rich discussion for just a few minutes. We were talking, and we talked about some of the complexities and contradictions of everything. So I'd love to hear maybe from 3 people, just sharing something that came up in your conversation that you'd like to share with the group. Skylar?
Hi, I'm Skylar. Dot and I discussed restorative justice. And really, a big, working our way back, found that the most important part was investing in human beings if you want a greater financial return.
Investing in human beings. Restorative justice. Thank you. Other ideas?
So we kind of focused on the second question beyond the body cameras, and we were, I guess, kind of talking about how the issue doesn't just lie into giving people more equipment or increasing accountability in some ways for police officers, but kind of countering the deeper systemic, like, racial mental biases that we have. I was kind of thinking about a debate I had with some people on Facebook, and one pointed out that the presiding officer during Eric Gardner's, I guess, murder was a black lady, and they kind of pointed to that as proof that, hey, this isn't racist, there's a black lady that ran it. But I pointed out that, even for blacks, because of the culture of racism, in certain situations, we probably fare no better than the average white person, because what makes what systemic racism is to a large degree unconscious, and it's shaped by our culture and the things that we see. And so beyond the body cameras really points to, for me, like, really focusing on the psychological, cultural underpinning of it all.
I didn't actually partner with anyone. I was taking pictures. But one thing that came to mind for me was just like, that like at least what we've seen in the last, like year or so, of like the shooting of unarmed Black children and men, it isn't connected. So there's like dealing with the issue of like targeting poor communities and targeting communities of color, and specifically targeting Black men, and it doesn't actually matter whether you're poor if you're Black, because those kids were like normal, average middle class people. So just like to keep that in mind when we have these conversations, that there's like distinctions within that, and that it's not necessarily about being poor and Black. It's actually just, being Black.
Maybe one more.
So we focused on number 2 and talked a little bit about the body cameras. And just a comment about that. I was listening to the radio and the news, and they were talking about police with the body cameras. And the problem with those cameras is that oftentimes the right equipment is not provided by the department. They're able to turn on and off these cameras of their own volition, at their own discretion. And there's no outside management, there's no outside control about what's being filmed and how it's being saved or recorded. So a police officer could have the camera off, film what the police officer would ultimately benefit from, and turn it off during the other parts. And that is a huge problem because you're not going to get the whole picture. So the cameras are not the end all be all.
Thank you. Okay, I want to transition. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing out and for talking with people in your small groups. I'm going to turn it over to our panelists who are going to join us up here to talk about their experiences and go more deeply into the questions that we've been asking.
Huge thank you to our panelists who are joining us today. We thank you so much for joining us and bringing your heart and your work and your life experience into this. And the way that this is going to work is that we have a series of questions that the panelists are going to be answering. And then there'll be a time for a question and answer after that. So we ask that you hold your questions until the end. If you have a hard time remembering a question, like, ooh, I have a question, maybe write it down and then you'll remember it. Or use some sort of trick to remember. And the way that we'll be doing question and answer at the end is we'll take a few questions, and the panelists will have an option which question they want to answer. We'll do it like that. All right, let's get started. So the first question for everyone to answer is, we would love for you to tell us about your work and life experience, and why it is that you're on this panel talking about institutional racism and oppression of the poor. So who wants to start? We'll go like that. Mark, how about Mark?
We can start on this end. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a civil rights lawyer, and I've handled dozens of cases against police officers, police departments, both as a civil lawyer in federal court suing police for excessive force cases, for other constitutional violations. I also was a lawyer for the city of Chicago, so I had a lot of discipline cases of police officers, and I got to see what the discipline process looked like on the inside of the city of Chicago's police department. So I have a passion for that work. I guess personal experience is also, I grew up as a Latino in a community outside of Chicago, and experienced some elements of police oppression, as well as, I would say, school oppression as a youth, which I think is why I ended up veering off toward the civil rights aspect of being a lawyer.
Hi, I'm Alex Fisher. I'm one of the Root Collective members here. And the work that I've done over the last decade or so is a lot of unpaid volunteer work around anti-racism as a white person, and to just be a little more specific about what that looks like for me has been a two-pronged approach of supporting the work of people of color-led movements and organizations by doing behind-the-scenes work. For the most part, I did a lot of fundraising and event support work for organizations when I used to live in Oakland, as well as some organizations here in Brattleboro. So the importance of saying as a white person that I'm going to step back and that I'm going to raise the experiences and the voices of people of color by supporting them doing the frontline work. And then the other prong of that for me is doing work with other white folks, and that looks like political education, that looks like one-on-one conversations. And for me, a lot of my own education and sort of internal digging and diving around what it means to be white and how to really connect to the humanity piece that was brought up earlier about sort of for me like what is lost in myself through white supremacy, and how do I privilege, but also where am I continuing that, and how do I connect with people on a way that sees people as people and not as something less than that.
How many people know who I am? 1, 2.
Do you know who you are?
I don't know. I can't help but flash back to my earlier days in South Carolina, where I saw cotton fields. And I remember I went to a little church down there, and across there was this restaurant that I went into. And I remember distinctly in the restaurant was a sign that said, white only. We're talking early 60s. And then on the side there was a black only bathroom. And I used the black only bathroom that day. Got chastised by a few of my soldiers at that time. I brought back a little piece of cotton from the cotton field, and I saw people of color in poverty down there, which upset me. I went over to Germany, and in Germany my battalion commander was a black major, Samuel D. Whitfield, who I learned more from that man. He was a mentor in my life and started my life out really in the civil rights area. The battalion I was in probably was 2/3 black. And I served out there for 18 months and came home June. Now I have 46 years of law enforcement experience. I'm the only cop here. Any other cops here? No? Minority. I've worked for the Brattleboro Police Department for 2 years, Vermont State Police for 28 years, Sheriff's Department concurrently on the county level for 2 years. And I work at the federal court with Judge Murtha as the lead court security officer. So I'm now working on the federal level. Been a long time resident of Brattleboro. I've seen the changes that have come to Brattleboro. When I grew up, there was one black person I knew of in the entire town. And that goes for Latino or Spanish, whatever culture you want to come from. Curtis and I, and Curtis will speak to it too, but Curtis and I, 7 years ago, I got on the Vermont Advisory Committee for the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. We both also serve on the Vermont State Police, have for the last, I think, 3 years, for the Vermont State Police Fair and Impartial Policing. Curtis and I are authors, along with Tara O'Brien. Is she here? Tara O'Brien, if you know Tara, served on the commission also. And we authored in 2008 a little book here on
Racial profiling.
racial profiling, and it was a report that we filed with the U.S. Commission. You can go online and read the whole thing. Since then, we're... Was that the ding?
That's the ding.
Okay. Well, I hope by the time I leave here, you get to know who I am and...
Would you give us your name, please, for the...
Oh, Terry Martin.
Thank you.
Sure. You can find me on Facebook.
My name is Dottie Morris, and I'm a psychologist by training, a clinical psychologist. I haven't practiced in years for a variety of reasons. And if you want to talk about it, we can talk about that later. I grew up in Louisiana, so I grew up knowing about Angola for a variety of reasons, one of which is because of something that happened in my hometown that led to years and years and years of trying to get a person out of prison. And even though he was released some 40 years later, he's still living in hiding because people still want to harm him and pretty angry with him. I started, I guess, you know, from birth, growing up at a time when there was a lot of attention in my town. And I remember one of the first experiences of really thinking about police brutality was when we had a pastor who lived in my neighborhood who was really at the front edge of a lot of the civil rights. And so he was out with a group of people protesting that we didn't have any black folks on the police force, and he was beaten by the police, and so that drew a lot of attention to that particular idea that we needed to integrate the police force. I also grew up with some amazing mentors, not only in my school but in my church, and one person that I really want to give you know, like a lot of I guess shout out, you know, was a person who died a couple years ago, and her name was Rupert Clemens, and she went on to become the national president for the NAACP. And along with some of the work that she did, not only within the community but also within the prison system, really helped me to form some of my ideas. She's just one of hundreds of people. So that's how I came to this work.
Good afternoon. My name is Curtis Reed. I'm the director for Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity. And I'm a native of St. Louis. So the events in Ferguson are really about events of life back home where my dad lives and family. I came to Vermont in '79. And within my first 6 months had met 90% of the Brattleboro police force. Not because I dialed 911. Well, 911 didn't exist back then.
So we did this on the phone.
However, I did not let that experience deter me from the work that I currently do in working with state police, working with law enforcement, working to improve the relationship between not only communities of color, but all communities within the state, and in a way that validates our collective experiences, in a way that allows us to see the humanity of those people who we charge to serve and protect, but also giving them the opportunity to grow. I mean, we live in a place, we think of our work as being part of the solution, in that we have, I think, sufficient convening power now to be able to engage the upper levels of law enforcement leadership to really take a second look at how we do business, how we engage the public, how we train officers. And I'll get into more about that a little bit later on. But overall, as an organization, our vision is that Vermont is recognized as the epicenter of diversity, inclusion, and equity thought and practice in the United States. And that's what we're working towards.
Okay, I'm Tatiana. My experience is at my school at UHS we have this club called Aware, and we basically talk about criminalization stuff and racial profiling and people of color. So that's my experience with that. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Our next question, which Mark and Dottie will speak to, is What do you see as the underlying causes of institutional racism and class oppression?
I'm going to go first,
Yeah,
Johnny?
you go first.
All right. I guess as I think about it now, the question probably answers itself. I think that the underlying issue is that it is institutional. I think we've gotten rid of, I would say, most of the people who actively go out and say, I'm going to be racist today. But we're constantly bombarded by messages about what race means and what people of different races are all about. And that is in our collective psyche. So I was talking to a good friend of mine earlier today, and he had talked to me about how he really recognizes or needs to recognize or wants to recognize or does recognize that he has latent racism or latent otherisms. And we all do, and I think we deny it. I think people are really uncomfortable about that, and we try to hide that. But it is part of who we are, and it's part of the messages that we're constantly getting. And that doesn't stop when people join police departments or join places of power or become teachers. It becomes part of what their narrative is, unless they're willing to actively look at who they are and look at their practices and look at what they're doing and look at how they're furthering that institutional racism.
I'm just gonna ask everyone to speak up a little bit so that for the live streaming so they can hear.
I hear you. I think a question that always pops into my head when I think about institutional racism is related to something that was posed by Audre Lorde. Can we dismantle the master's house using the master's tools? We can do it for a short time, but it won't last. And so I often think about that when I think about racism, especially implicit racism, that type of racism that is so deeply rooted that as an African American woman, I've internalized a lot of it, and it's so deeply rooted that sometimes I don't even realize how it's having an impact on how I might interact with Curtis or how I might interact with Michaela, because it's so deeply rooted. And I think that part of what we have to do is work very hard to think of a different narrative and take control of the language. I think the whole idea of the criminalization of people of color, it's really the criminalization of the system. The system is criminal. When we think about healthcare and some of the things that go on within healthcare, the number of people who cannot have access to healthy food, clean water, substantial housing, education, all of the social determinants of health, that's criminal. So I think that what we have to do is we have to shake this up, refocus, and change the narrative. We can't continue to use the same language that has been used by the master to think, and I've used master in quote, because we use master all the time, because we're about to do a master plan at my institution, and I always laugh when we talk about them, and I just say, I want to put an apostrophe on that, because we have to think about what does that language implies if we continue to use the same oppressive language. And I think that it becomes so programmed in our heads that there's something called shooter's bias. And I was trained as a clinical psychologist, and I'm like, darn, I should have done social psychology. Because it's a construct by social psychologists. And what they did was they took regular college students, and what they did was they would flash a screen and they had to pull the trigger and shoot someone. They were more inclined to shoot faster at an unarmed African American person than they were a white person. Now, the thing that scares me most about it, it didn't matter the race of the person doing the pulling of the trigger. So we have so often connected danger with black, danger with dark. Danger, anything that's black is dangerous, that connection has become so strong in our heads that it makes us do this a lot faster. Okay? The same thing there was a study done, and I'm going to be done in a minute, that was just done earlier. There was a study that was just done earlier this year where Black and Latino boys are less likely to be seen as innocent, and they're always projected as being older than they are. Think about that for a moment. Because when you see a child, and you think of that child as innocent, you're less likely to shoot a 12-year-old baby in the streets. But if you think of that child as being 15, 21, whatever, and then you automatically think that they're dangerous. So we have to change the narrative. We have to work as hard as we can. And I teach. And some people say those who can do, those who can't teach. I think it's the most honorable profession that ever existed. So I needed to put that out there.
Preach it.
Oh, yeah, it's Sunday after all.
This is the Roots version of church. So the next question is, how does the death of Michael Brown and other young people of color impact you and relate to Brattleboro? And this question is for TT.
I feel like the Michael Brown situation affected me because nowadays, like, I don't really like to like walk outside and stuff like by myself because like I never know like what's like around, like what's gonna happen or like what's around me, and like if I don't feel like safe because like I've heard about like all this stuff and we've been talking about it at school, but I feel like it hasn't, well, in a way it hasn't really affected Brattleboro that much as it has for like New York and like actually Ferguson. So like at my school, like most of the kids at my school don't really know about the situation that happened, and I feel like nobody really educates the school that much about it. And like Michaela we have our group aware, and Michaela comes in and she tells it, like we talk about it all the time. So I feel like the little group that we have at our school has been trying to educate people in our school and in other schools about it. So I feel like it's been semi a like positive thing for us to like learn and stuff. So yeah.
Thank you. And the next question for Curtis, Terry, and Alex is, how does the death of Michael Brown and other young people of color, oh, we just did that one. What is it?
Well, I can speak to that.
What has been tried in this community to address institutional racism and class oppression?
Okay. We just finished the first decade of a 4-decade initiative at Vermont Partnership. And the title of that initiative is called Vermont Vision for a Multicultural Future. And we've spent a considerable amount of time field testing that idea here in Brattleboro. That we shifted, literally about a decade ago, from addressing issues of social justice alone. There'd be an incident that would take place, and the then organization Alana would be the one in the forefront, be the one in the media, be the one who really addressing the issue without a lot of sort of community support. And then I guess it was when the incident of the, I guess it's 2007, the incident with the racial epithets on the Dummerston Bridge, we decided to take another tactic, which is, oh, no, it wasn't that one, it was before that, it was with the NHRA, excuse me, which was, for those of you who don't know what the NHRA was the Nigger Hanging Redneck Association. It was a group at the high school, and at that point we decided that we were not going to do this alone. And so we convened as many community members and community leaders as we could down in the town offices to really talk about a collective approach to dealing with issues of social justice. On the heels of that was the incident at Dummerston, then followed the scratching the KKK into the cross at St. Michael's Church, St. Michael's Catholic Church, which all at that point began to have a much broader, much more diverse set of people stepping forward and saying, this is unjust, and what can we do to sort of right this wrong? The other thing that we've taken that approach and we've brought it statewide. That, you know, much of our work actually takes place in places other than Brattleboro. But there are collectives of folks in Rutland, in Burlington, in Montpelier, you know, that are addressing these issues collectively. Multiracial, multi-generational, you know, a whole range of LGBTQ community that are involved in addressing these issues on a statewide basis. The other thing, which is probably much more important and relevant to today, is the work that we do with law enforcement. In 2003, we published a study on police-community relations that showed a disproportionate contact between law enforcement and communities of color. The day after that report, amidst all of the naysayers in law enforcement, the Colonel of State Police, Jim Baker, came to my office unannounced to ask the question, what can we do to change this? It wasn't about the credibility of the organization, it wasn't about our methodology, it wasn't about disputing our findings, but the simple question, what can we do to create greater trust amongst law enforcement and particularly communities of color? And you know, that conversation has led to you know, lots of changes within state police. We train, okay, I'll wrap it up. So we train every new class of state troopers with around bias-free policing. We've trained probably half of the sheriff's department in the state. We've trained Brattleboro Police Department, Burlington, Rutland. With state police, they have a really great early warning system. We've trained their supervisors. When they detect racial bias in their contact, one of their troopers' contact, we oftentimes get a phone call to help them verify that. And then how do we integrate that particular incident into the training of new officers? State police is a good 7 or 8 years ahead of the rest of state government when it comes to addressing implicit bias. They have a succession plan. When Colonel Esperance, he loves to tell this story, he said, you know, after I was sworn in as Colonel of State Police, I got in my car, and the first thing I did, I came to Curtis Reed's office to let him know that we were not going to drop the ball on the issue of racial profiling and bias within state police. At our last conference, Vermont Vision Conference, we held in November, we had a gate crasher. Colonel Esperance showed up with his successor, and he said, I know the major's not invited, but I wanted him to meet the people with which he needs to develop really strong and productive relationships with. And so it's ingrained within state police. We'd like to push it out to education, healthcare, and all the other sectors that sort of touch our lives. So.
Curtis spoke to some of the local things that are going on, and I would have deferred that question to him locally. But on a statewide basis, and you're going to walk out of here today and find out there's a lot more being done behind the scenes that will affect what's happening locally here. And you'll carry the ball here, but I mentioned about the study that was done on racial bias in policing. We did a study with that. There's a traffic enforcement study that was done on the Vermont State Police. They studied over a number of years. And even most recently, they increased it to, I think, 5 or 6 years now, of hundreds of thousands of stops. Every time a stop is made, it's recorded. The culture, the color, all that is recorded to try to pick up on certain patterns of, is a trooper out there just stopping black people? Is it or Hispanic or whites, or why are so many the disproportionate arrests and convictions that are putting people in prisons? We're looking at that on the side with the commission that we work with. In January, there was analysis done by Dr. Jack McDivitt and Anne Marie Hackstein, and from the Institute of Race and Justice at Northwestern University. That continues to be increased. There was also a contrary study that was done speaking, was that a good study? And were the figures right, were the statistics right? Both Curtis and I serve on the Vermont State Police Committee on Impartial Policing, Fair and Impartial Policing. We just had a meeting December 2nd. We're meeting on a regular basis to talk about the things that are happening on the road and the interaction of law enforcement. Vermont State Police, I'm very proud to have been a trooper for 28 years. I don't like officers in any level of law enforcement that tarnish the badge. And I will turn that person in just as quickly as I can. I've turned 2 people in and saw them fired. A sergeant and a lieutenant in the state police were fired because I stepped up to the plate. Now, it doesn't make anything great, but I don't want people looking at that badge and not having the respect that should be given to that badge. You know, I've worked 46 years now in law enforcement, and I want somebody to respect that badge. If I do something wrong, I'll step up to the plate and take responsibility. Some other studies that were going on, there was addendum and briefing with the Vermont Committee to the U.S. Commission on Rights. That was Stephanie Seguino?
Right, Stephanie
She's
Seguino.
a professor at the University of Vermont. So there's many things happening behind. You can go on to the website for the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, and you can see many of the studies, and a couple of them that have come out of Vermont that are changing. Vermont State Police came up with a model program on discrimination and how law enforcement polices out there. The Attorney General's office has come up with another model program. Every law enforcement agency in the state of Vermont, and I forget the deadline of that, but every constable, every local constable, every sheriff, every state trooper, everybody in the state of Vermont is going to have to adapt that model policy on how they handle people out there, and they will be held accountable. So I'm very proud that my organization stepped up to the plate to be the first among law enforcement to do that. So you're going to see some changes out there. I don't agree with everything that's happening in the world right now and in the United States, but I'm very proud to have served the number of years I have in law enforcement. And I don't make excuses for bad law enforcement, like I said. I don't. I'll agree with you if I have to, and I will. But it might give you a different perspective too.
I had some things I thought I was going to say and change them. So I'm just thinking, I'm trying in a few things in my head around Mel's question around sort of the importance of reform and abolition, reform and creating new systems. Daddy using the Audre Lorde quote of, not using the master's tool to dismantle the master's house, and thinking about a lot of pieces. So one of the things that I did when I moved to Brattleboro only 4 years ago, so what I'm going to talk about is like very narrow in terms of a lot of work that's been done in this community, is I joined the CPCC, which is the Citizen Police Communication Committee. It's a town committee that is supposed to be sort of a liaison and a communicative liaison between the community and the police department. And I did a lot of work out in California around police accountability, and time again, the major barrier to having conversations directly around misconduct with the police is internal affairs with the police. Is the thought that the police can police themselves, and this is, I support unions, but this is part of the police unions, and so it is tricky. And so just thinking about that was something that I tried to do here. Moving to a small town, was able to just say, I'd like to be on the committee, and it worked. And that is very different than living in Oakland, California, where you're appointed, and I've never met anyone that was even on the committee, and things like that. So I think for me, there's a important piece in talking about both what's working as well as what's been tried and doesn't work, and where are some dead ends that people have already gone to. And so for me, there's an importance in that work around engaging with the system to say that we're here and we care and there's issues that we want to bring up, as well as being clear on where to put energy to create the new system and to create new visions. So for me, I deeply appreciate the work that was just talked about in terms of a lot of, I think, the reforms and working within the system, and how do we specifically stop the killing of Black folks on the streets. Like, how do we respect the lives and allow people to live, as well as creating new systems that are going to support that. And so I think just some of the other pieces that have happened around here that aren't necessarily about law enforcement, but is a little bit more around community organizing. So I think one of the things that I was supposed to talk about is the root. Not have to, but in the sense that for me, when I'm one of the founders, and when we were talking about having the root, and as Angela mentioned at the beginning, it was to have conversations like this with people. And in a year and a half, we've outgrown our space because we didn't know that this is what the community wanted and needed, and we didn't know that there's such hunger and thirst to talk about this. And so I think that some of the stuff that's happening is having those conversations. And we can talk, I think I'm going to talk more later on sort of the importance of having one-on-one conversations. And I think what's been said and pointed to a lot, both by Mark and Dottie, as well as other folks, is the importance of seeing the system in ourselves and seeing how the system lives in us and how we're going to change that. And that happens through moments of community accountability. It happens through moments of coming together, and it happens through things like one-on-one conversations with people that are inspiring us and that are teaching us and that are challenging us and that are coming at it with a lot of love and compassion. And I'm holding myself together a lot from not crying right now, just because it's really humbling to be on this panel, as well as just like how hard, like, as a white person, I have no idea what it's like to experience a lot of the stuff that's been talked about. And if I'm like having such a hard time holding myself together for that pain, I just like want to honor and put that out there of the intensity of the work that we're doing. And so being able to be brave and sit on panels and talk about this stuff is also the work that we're doing to change criminalization and to speak up for folks and allow people's voices to rise.
One more question for anyone who wants to speak to this question, which is, what are the next steps? And how do we expand the work?
I'll start? Okay. So I think part of the challenge is, well, first I want to make one quick additional comment about state police and accountability, and you're working on the SPCC. At the state police, there's called the SPAC, State Police Advisory Council, and it is separate and apart from internal affairs. It is a place where citizens can make complaints about state troopers or anyone within state police. It's mandated by statute. There are 5 members on the SPAC. There are currently 2 people of color, one African-American woman who's a associate dean or dean at Vermont Law School, and another is a gentleman who works for the Department of Corrections. so that any complaints that find their way through state police are going to find their in front of the SPAC. So it's a resource that we should all use. Back to the question, much of what we see is an analysis paralysis, that here in Vermont, there's a great tendency amongst white folk to analyze the problem to death. Spend time in study circles, spend time with reading clubs, but we need to move that out into action. And part of that action is engaging folks in your community, particularly folks who are on the margins, engaging them in conversations about not only their experience, but also how collectively we can address institutional racism. Now, Vermont is in this bubble, in that we're a small state. We can do things here that we believe could be done elsewhere, but they really need to kind of scale up. But we live in this kind of human-scaled existence where you get to know your neighbor. But as is the case, some of our neighbors we don't approach. And that's part of that implicit bias, that kind of implicit racism that you're not reaching out. We're not being intentional about building community. And it takes hard work. Use the analogy of how many spices are in your spice cabinet? 25, 30, 40, but how many do we use on a regular basis? Maybe 4 or 5. Salt and pepper, and that's it. But if you want to make that nice curry dish, or if you need cilantro, or that you really need to be intentional about building that in your kitchen, on your stove. You need to do that in your community. You need to reach out, you need to be engaged. This is a place that is really easy to get involved. Encourage our marginalized neighbors to get involved. One of the major transitions that happened over the last year in state government is that we were able to get the governor to change the webpage for gubernatorial boards and commissions, so that there's an online application. People know when people are rolling off of a committee or not. So when people come to me and say, I really don't like what's happening in healthcare, I said, don't talk to me unless you've already applied to be on the Health Oversight Committee. Or, I have a problem with law enforcement. Don't talk to me unless you've applied to be a member of the SPAC or one of the other oversight committees in law enforcement. We'll stop it there. All right.
I want to follow up a little bit on what Curtis says. I think Curtis makes a really good point, and that is that we need to endeavor ourselves to be willing to have difficult conversations whenever they come up. I mean, Dottie has her Got Privilege shirt. I mean, we should all wear something that is going to cause
I have
us...
10 extra shirts. Talk to me, I'll leave them at the roof, and they can hand them out.
Right, so I think we need to be out there to have those conversations. When somebody might come up and say, "Hey, Daddy, what does that T-shirt mean?" My daughter is waiting for her shirt to arrive, the Black Lives Matter shirt. I want her to talk to her 10-year-old friends about these issues. I had a conversation 10 days ago with a couple sheriff's deputies who were poo-pooing this whole thing about race and policing. And, you know, I had to talk to them about what the other perspective was. At the end of the conversations, thank you for sharing, you know, what the other perspective was. So I think we tend to shy away in, not just in this country, but even in this community, as progressive as we like to think that we are. We shy away from those hard conversations about race. We shy away from those hard conversations about institutionalized racism, about white privilege, about the way that the society is designed to oppress people. And so I'm just going to call out everybody here to go out and to find the way to have those hard conversations, whether it's taking one of Dottie's shirts, or whether if you overhear somebody say something, you know, respond to it. Don't be afraid.
I remember a long time ago, I had anxiety about flying in airplanes, that is. And I wanted to make that really clear. And I remember to the day that I lost that fear of flying. And I think that that's part, I had to let go of my fear of flying to live life a lot fuller. So I'm gonna ask you to let go of your fear. And I think that as you start to let go of that fear of having those difficult conversations, of speaking up, because you have to understand that all of our lives are connected. You know, I mean, I love that Ray Charles, the way he took that song, the phrase, none of us are free if one of us is in chains. So I think that part of what we have to do is understand how intimately connected we are, and we can't buy the narrative that we're qualitatively different, because that is what's used constantly to promote supremacy. And you don't, okay, I always have to remember I'm in New England, you know, and I mean, but I think I owe it to you to be fooling myself. I think that that's another piece, is that oftentimes we don't want to be who we really are because we don't want to scare folks. I use a lot of hand motions, but I don't ever plan to hit anyone. Okay? So I think I want to go back to this whole idea of this illusion of difference. And that's often used for us to keep each other down because, again, we know what can happen, divide and conquer. So I'm gonna encourage you to work on your own stuff, and in any place where you have influence, use that influence to do what Bell Hooks called calling the question. Oftentimes, a question can lead people down a road that they never thought they were gonna go on. So when people try to confront me about, well, you sure those statistics are true? I don't even argue about it anymore. I just say, entertain with me for a moment, just for a moment, that I am telling you the truth. What would that mean to you to know that that's true? We don't even have to argue about if it's true or not. Just for a moment, go down this path with me. Let's go together. I'm gonna go with you. But just entertain for a moment that this is true. What would that mean to you to know that some people are literally fighting for their lives on a daily basis? What would that mean to you? And I think that that changes it because it diffuses everything. I decided I'm gonna conserve a lot of my energy, believe it or not, and not argue with people. Because my other revenge is to live a long time. Okay? My other, is to live longer. And so what happened was I used to, just be all combative. And it led me with hypertension and a whole host of other things. Now I've decided I'm gonna try a different approach, because the sweetest revenge is to live longer, to constantly ask people questions, because I wanted people to come up with their own solutions. Believe it or not, I want you to come up with your own, even though I'm feeding it to you. So I think that's a critical step, is we have to lose that fear. And I've flown so many times since I lost that fear, and every time it's as beautiful. Even when there's trouble, I'm like, God, this is really cool. And so I think that part of what happens is that we build up more fear in us about saying something to our neighbor, about talking to our loved ones, significant others, and it just overtakes us. I say, let it go. Let it go, let it go. Because the snow never bothered me anyway. say. And then we can have an impact on the system within whatever sphere of influence that you might have.
Right, right.
Who wants to follow Dottie?
I can sacrifice.
Well, I tried to lead in with a joke. Let it
go. So one of the things I've been thinking about is next steps is the idea of all of them. So there's a lot of stuff coming out around protesting isn't working and petitions don't work and having conversations don't work, and you know that there's all of this negative, none of this stuff is working, and there's also a lot of really amazing voices coming out and saying we actually need to try them all. That there's a history, and so one of the things that is an important, I think, next step for me is really doing the historical work to say what's worked in the past, right? Like as Michaela spoke about earlier, that this is a civil rights movement, and there have been civil rights movements over and over and over again that have won different kind of victories. And to think of ourselves as being part of a movement, and what are the different pieces that fit into that larger puzzle. So when does protesting and when does rioting have its place? When does having one-on-one conversations and study groups have its place? When does community organizing have its place? When does creating the new system and saying fuck it to what's been going on have its place? So encouraging the imagination, encouraging that abolitionist spirit of saying what is possible, what have we not tried, what can we try differently, and also the ability to fail. We're living in a time where there is a ton of failure. We're already failing. So, I mean, but you know what I mean? Like, doing something, for me as a white person, getting over that fear of failure, of being racist. Like as Mark was talking about earlier, I'm racist. I'm brought up in a racist society. I have that in me. And to get over that fear that anything I do could be perceived as racist if I don't do the perfect thing. So challenging myself and others to just try something new, try something that you know has worked. I think are some of the crucial next steps, and I think also something that's a conversation that's been happening in Vermont that is really beautiful to me is the idea of building a movement, the idea of building movements, and not building organizations, not building causes, but really coming together to build a larger piece that has the power to make change. And one of the examples was, do you guys know Migrant Justice? They're an incredible statewide organization in Vermont that is led by migrant farm workers around, it started around a lot of different rights, right, that are not being afforded to, and they just won a campaign on driver's license bill. And some of us down here were doing white solidarity work with a mostly Latino-led organization, and at one point they said to us, like, we can't deal with you. We don't have the capacity, and that's not what we're doing. We're not organizing white folks. Y'all need to go hang out with the Worker Center, because the Vermont Worker Center, another amazing organization, is doing movement work, and they will be our allied organization. We need to build a movement. We don't need you to build up our organization. What we need to build is partnerships and alliances, and we need you to do what we say. And it was a hard conversation. It was also really beautiful, and I think also a conversation I had with someone recently was I have the privilege of having organized with a lot of white anti-racism organizations that are part of a larger movement, and I think it's really easy to sometimes feel like I'm the only one or I'm not connected to anything that's existed before, that exists now and is moving forward, and to really contextualize what we're doing here as part of a larger movement, as part of bigger power than just Brattleboro, than just a conversation I'm having with one person, but being able to really feel the power behind that and the humanity behind that moving forward, and that everything we do matters because it's part of something bigger, and we're building bigger things to take down things that aren't working and to use that collective vision and imagination to build better systems.
I know that only 4 of you know who I am. Who knows Dick Guthrie? How many of you know Dick Guthrie? Wow, more than triples of people know me. Dick Guthrie was the epitome of community policing, and I'm seeing that now the Brattleboro Police Department has started a coffee with a cop. Any of you ever been to that yet down the works?
Heard of it.
No, heard about it? That's a good start, but it's not total community policing. Community policing is for the cop to get out in the streets. I'm a firm believer of the street cop. When I was on the Brad PD, we had 2 cops on the street. and one worked the south end of Elliott, one worked the north end, and they stopped into businesses, they talked to people on the street, they got to know their families. Dick Guthrie was our walking computer back in those days. If you said, I saw a black Dodge going by, he said, oh yeah, the plate number is such and such, he works at such and such place, his father's this guy here, his grandfather used to live over on this street. He could tell you everything about that because he was out in the community and he knew the people and he got to know the people. And the same thing with the officers that ride around their cruisers. They need to pull over to the side of the road sometime, talk to people. They need to stop in at events like this. I'm disappointed I'm the only retired cop here. Now they just get retired every day, but they need to be out with the people. They aren't. That isn't true community policing. When we need a collective co-op of people, when you have a meeting, and we did this with the Civil Rights Commission. You bring in a local cop, you bring in a county sheriff, you bring in a state trooper, you bring in somebody from the federal level, and you set a panel up with those kind of people, or you invite them to your different meetings so that they can give their perspective or give you maybe better understanding why cops do this, how come they handle it this way, and give you some of the protocol, why we do things the way we do. And that inclusiveness is what I put down here, that this is what it has to be, a collective partnership. Burlington started, and Curtis can speak to that, the collective partnerships that are up there where law enforcement is working totally with the people of color and the migrant farmers and you name it. There's a group that's working in that area. And they're collectively reaching answers, resolution. They say this is how long has this been going on? Years and years and years. And it's probably going to take years and years and years to change it. But that's how you're going to do it, is get the Brat PD, get a member of the Brat PD under your various meetings, downtown, talking to people from the state police. All you live in Brattleboro? Anybody live out? I mean, there's state police have their town committees that they go out. Brattleboro started this Coffee with Cops. Sheriff's Department has a number of different programs they're doing. But they've got to step up to the plate too. You know, to give you a better understanding of who we are and why we do things the way we do them. That's not what I got to say. Curtis also recently at our meeting up in Royalton came up with some ideas on what the state police is going to do further to bridge the gap there.
Right.
Do you want to speak to that?
Yes.
Okay.
Just
briefly.
A critical strategy that we employ is building relationships before critical incidents happen.
That's important.
Okay, it's difficult to have a conversation with someone in the middle of a tragedy or the middle of a high stress, high profile sort of event. I started off saying that we're 10 years into a 40 years initiative. Okay, so we've delayed the socialization of instant gratification. That it has to happen yesterday. It has to happen now. But we've been rather methodical in how we go about engaging the system in building the relationships so that we can have the conversation before a critical incident happens. And when a critical incident does happen, then there's an element of trust that we're going to get to a resolution that is going to be mutually satisfactory to all parties. I had to totally change my paradigm as a young black man in Brattleboro who met law enforcement under a different set of circumstances. I have 3 teenage kids, and some of what I experienced they're experiencing today, particularly my young men. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but we need to be able to establish the relationships in order to move the dial. So.
Can I put you on the spot? Do you mind?
But it's okay.
Like someone's gonna say no to you, What, I mean, I think I was struck by what you said earlier and then what you said, Curtis. You talked about being afraid. What do you need from us? What do you need from, I would say from me, to be there for you and for your friends? Because I talked about releasing the fear, but I want to validate that it is scary.
I don't know. I think I'm not really sure how to answer this one. Because, but like I feel like the only my friends, like sometimes they feel like they don't want to go outside because they feel like they're going to be approached by an officer and then not know how to get out of that situation. And they feel like my best friend actually, she walks downtown to the Boys and Girls Club to hang out with friends and stuff, but she doesn't like walking by herself because one time I guess a officer was talking to her and she felt uncomfortable because nobody really likes talking to officers unless it's nobody likes talking. Unless they help you find your coffee or something. When I lose my dogs, I love talking to them. So she was really uncomfortable with that situation. So I guess we had a thing I don't know what it's called. We did something at the Boys and Girls Club with officers, and we met with them and we talked to them about how we feel uncomfortable and what things could they help us with. And we a couple officers, my favorite Chad Emery. We talked to them about it and they were talking Chad I met him through my dad and we always I don't know Chad is one of the officers who actually gets involved and actually wants to talk to you and is a sweet person, and the other officers are just they seem like they don't like their job, so they seem when they see a person of color, they just trigger and it's just I know that I can get away with this, so I'm just gonna do it to you because I already know that it's gonna be fine and nobody's gonna care. And so, yeah, thank you.
That's good.
Thank you. Yeah. But I feel people need to I feel like we need to spread it out through schools because not a lot of teenagers actually understand and appreciate the things that we're doing now today, and they don't understand what's actually going on because they don't pay attention to that. They're paying attention to other stuff besides the important things, and it's true. But, so I feel I've actually been talking to for a couple people in the Aware group. We've actually been thinking about asking Michaela to go to other schools and actually talk to them about it. We haven't talked to you about it yet. Yeah, volunteer. We even actually Wednesday we have diversity day. No. Activity day at our school, and we're actually going to talk to her about it then. But we're going to talk to her about going to the elementary schools and the middle schools and stuff. And I met this person up where I live in Dover, and he's actually the principal of the Dover school, and I actually talked to him already about going up there and talking to him. It's in that area, so it's easier. And so that way it's it's not only reaching Brattleboro, it's actually reaching further up. So, and you plan to Back her up.
Thanks to all of the panelists. A huge round of applause. I bet there's some questions. Is that true? So the way we're going to do this is we're going to do 3 questions at a time, and the panelists will be able to choose which question they want to respond to. And again, we're going to try and keep responses brief so we can move through this and get to as many questions as we can. Do you want to take Scott, or do you want to take Zach and facilitate?
It doesn't matter. Want to go? Oh, it doesn't matter. Yeah. So if you can be as loud as possible, like me, I'm a loud mouth. But we can repeat questions too. Let me take this one in the back.
I'm a loud mouth. Okay. I wanted to comment. I'm new to Vermont.
Welcome.
I have lived in Western Massachusetts. Something that I'd like to see everybody here do is bear witness and support with your police. That means that if you see somebody stopped with the blue lights flashing, then you pull up behind them and you just wait. No body cameras, okay? Because you live here and you know your police, all right? Someone did that for me when I was stopped by the police on 91. It was very comforting, all right? It was very comforting. And I wanted to say what I am doing is I was since 2003 in Western Massachusetts. So from the 26th through the 1st, at the All Souls Unitarian Church, I'm going to be having a Kwanzaa conversation, all right, with the whole community, meaning that every day from 12:15 until 12:45, we're going to talk about community, all right? We're not going to talk about it as an African tradition. We're talking about community and what unity means and what self-determination means and what cooperative economics means, all right? That's 20 minutes south of you all. 20 minutes down 91, and you could even count the police cars that you see on your way if you come. All right, every day at noon at the All Souls Unitarian Church.
So my question,
Greenfield.
I guess I'll stand up because that seems appropriate. So you guys are really great. I'm really it's awesome to be here. My question is kind of related to what you said, Curtis, about like the spice rack. I really liked that analogy, but I'm wondering, do you mean, it's for all of you, so I'll ask it so that it's more relevant, but do you mean to like have friends who are, like if you're a white person in this room, which is majority, do you mean to like have friends who are Black or people of color and to like have that be part of your spice rack or your like curry or whatever you're making? And for others of you, whether that's what you meant or not, how can white people feel comfortable making friends with people of color without being like trying to like fit it in and like being awkward and asking about their hair or something weird, you know? Like how does anybody here have advice for
Wait
how to be
before you
more,
answer that.
okay, anybody have advice for how to be more inclusive and make sure that the community that you surround yourself with is representative of the world or of the country and of the values that you hold?
We're gonna try to get more than one question at a time, so this
okay.
First, thanks for making this happen. Thanks to the room. Thanks to the panel. I mean, this is great being this space. Question is, I'm wondering if beyond the smaller questions of relations with police, Ferguson doesn't raise, and all these killings doesn't raise something that would be another conversation to continue about the particularly dangerous moment we're in. I'm thinking of like Gaza, like when a whole population becomes surplus and is no longer needed for labor. You're looking at genocide, and we don't see this in Vermont necessarily, but you look at the large urban centers of New York, and maybe that's a discussion to have, because I think if we just discuss it at the level of improving policing, that's great, but I think there's something going on much bigger, like Gaza, where there's a real danger, and and I think that the young people of Ferguson and elsewhere, the young Black people of Ferguson and elsewhere, are taking the lead. But we're next. You know what I mean? It's like they're taking the lead against being gunned down in a whole system that's going a certain direction. And if we don't help and fight and join them, we're going to be next. So I don't know if that's a conversation to continue beyond just relations to the police, relations to the whole, what's going on.
You want to add to that one?
I was just going to ask kind of something similar of how do we connect the conversation of these interpersonal connections to the larger system in which this has to exist. And so the question to the panelists is, how do you connect it?
So does someone want to show?
I want to speak on the law enforcement side of it. If, like the lady read, if you want to pull up behind a cruiser, don't pull up tight on the cruiser. It makes the, if I can use the word hinky, it gives them a feeling, what's going on. I've got people in front of me, I've got people in back of me, and it's a control situation of being concerned for his or her livelihood. But if you want to stop it...
Can I just say, yeah, that's what I feel like when I get stopped by And as service to the public, I hope they can get more comfortable with people witnessing what they're doing. I'm hopeful.
Well, that's fine. I would have no problem if you wanted to walk up with a camera or something like that, but the officer does have to do their duty. If they maybe just stop the person for speeding, it's a perfectly legitimate stop. They have to have reasonable grounds, number one, to stop somebody. They can't just grab out and stop arbitrarily somebody on the highway. That's not to say it wouldn't happen or couldn't happen or didn't happen. It does happen. It does happen, but I can tell you the thousands and thousands of stops, it would make me feel just a little hinky if somebody was right directly behind me, especially if it was at nighttime and I don't know who you are, why you're stopping, whether you're just looking for how do I get to Greenfield or what. So I would have a concern with that.
Everybody's hearing this?
What's that?
This is a very important conversation that I suggested something that I think a citizen ought to be able to do in the United States without fear. I'm saying without fear. If there's fear in the police and there's fear in the person who's the citizen, we're in trouble. I didn't realize we were in that much trouble here in kind of rural Vermont. Thank you for educating me. Seriously.
The law says you can't stop on the interstate unless you have a reason to be stopping there. If you're broken down and how long you can stay on the interstate, there are certain rules that we have to abide by. Is it in the daytime where the officer wouldn't be bothered so much? If it's at nighttime, then I'm sure the officer would have some concerns about the stop. I read a book a number of years. Anybody ever read the book L.A. Justice, Lessons from the Firestone? It was written by the assistant chief, Vernon, of the LAPD, who I know personally. This was the Rodney King situation. He said when that happened, when the riots started, it set the relationships of LAPD with the relationships went back 40 years. It set it backwards, and he wrote a book about that. I'm proud. I saw Sheila out in the street the other day. She came by the federal court. They stood in front of the federal court and they made some chants and stuff like that. It was a peaceful demonstration, and that's the kind of demonstration you need. I haven't seen anybody wanting to burn a building down, destroy our shops downtown or anything like that. And that's how you reach across and you bridge across to the community. Destroying your own community is not the way to get there.
Okay, wait, can we just start? There's a stack that's happening that you guys are organizing. So just to make sure that everybody's voices are heard in the order that they were delivered, let's just make sure that.
So you think it's okay to riot then?
Hell yeah. No, I think you better look at the broader picture. In the media, we had a media problem with that. There were thousands and thousands of very peaceful protesters who were trying to get their message out. What did the media focus on? The riots.
Well, there's two things happening here. There's two things happening here, and one thing is that we're focusing in on an issue that's really a serious day-to-day life and death issue for some of us, and we can go on white and black, I'm sure, about negative experiences we had with the police or and go back and forth, but I think that the other thing that we wanted to connect this to is larger systemic issues. And I too am troubled by some of the things that have been said, but I think that we should take it a little bit more macro and make connections to Gaza and to the larger picture and to how I forgot the note of your question.
Yeah.
And weave this stuff back in, and not to say that we shouldn't talk about what we're talking about, but to weave it in so that it doesn't become a back and forth, because that's not useful for us.
So Brattleboro is.
Well, wait, Terry, we just
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to respond to your question about.
Remember it?
Oh, I did. So our spice cabinets, that's our community, okay? People oftentimes forget how diverse we are. There have been black people in Vermont since the 1740s. Okay, we've been for a long, long, long time. That spice cabinet, this is our community, but oftentimes we don't look at our community as being as diverse as it is. We have diversity here. What we don't have, and what we're working towards, is inclusion. And so my comment around inclusion really is that you really have to be intentional to include people. It can't be that random chance occurrence, but you really need to be intentional about approaching folks where they are, both in terms of their physical identities, but also in terms of our hidden identities. That there's a lot of us who are, I'm a black man, but I'm a cyclist, I like to cook, I like opera, I'm a Trekkie, there are any number of other ways to connect with me that is not exclusively around the issue of race. And what happens is that white folks, I'm making a gross generalization here, you see a black face and your implicit bias kicks in terms of, oh, well, what is he doing here? Or, do I need to be wary? But a lot of us who moved here voluntarily, and others of whom were born here, are much more than just the color of our skin. So, when I talk about going to that spice cabinet, it's looking at, okay, so how do I relate to this individual? It's kind of the inverse of the the golden rule, which is treat other people the way you like to be treated. But if your assumption about who I am simply doesn't even exist in your framework, your paradigm, then we need to be operating more closely on the platinum rule, which is treat other people the way that they want to be treated. But in order to do that, you need to engage people in conversation. And if you're not engaging people in conversation to find out, those hidden identities, whether it's, I don't drink gin, to something else. But that we really need to move beyond the stereotypes. We move beyond the assumptions and into taking that bold and courageous introduction of oneself to try to find those spaces where in fact we're having that those common lines.
I wanted to put Dottie on the spot really quick.
I also, I just had a remark because I don't even know where to go right now.
But Dottie, could you connect a few things that have already been said about Gaza and the word, I don't know. The word right is used, but I often think of the word insurrection and what that means and how that relates to what's happening now. and the idea that people focuses on the actions, what happens after, instead of what started it.
Right. I think that, you know, I don't know if you've ever listened to the TED Talk, the danger of a single story. And depending on where you start the story, the outcome is different. So if you start with secondly, without starting with the beginning of what happened. Now sometimes you can't find the beginning because the beginning is so deeply buried. So I think that I was thinking of like many things. First, I was reminded of what Winona LaDuke said. I don't want a bigger slice of the pie. I want a different pie altogether. And I think that that's the piece that we have to not be afraid to say, that we want a different pie instead of just people saying, I'm gonna just parcel out a little bitty piece for you, and then don't worry about those gay people, or don't worry about those people because I'm giving you yours. And you see, that has been at the core of the divide and conquer. So I think part of what we have to do is not be so desperate for that pie that we're willing to settle. And I think that the only way we can do that is to work in solidarity with one another. And I think that if we see an injustice, even in myself, please call me on it. If you see that I'm using language, because that's the only way you're going to help me be a better me so we can be a better us. The second thing that I was thinking about is this whole idea of anybody knows Mokhtar? You know Mokhtar? He came to me one day. Mokhtar? Yeah, he said to me, I get mixed up here. I'm from Louisiana. He said to me one day, he said, Dottie, I don't like inclusion. And I said, help me understand. He said, because when you include people, you've already established the agenda and you just add them into it. Okay? And there's a quote that says, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So this whole thing about thinking about ways that we can co-create a new system, and then we have to talk about power. Because the reason that folks are burning down their neighborhoods, it's all about power and control. It's all about power and control. So how do we not listen to that narrative and we reshape that narrative in such a way that what's happening in Gaza, we don't just say, what's wrong with those people? But we try to find out the connections between what the brother back there was saying. What does all of this mean? You have to always ask yourself, what does it mean? That I'm hearing this story, what's the rest of the story? There has to be another story. And we have to constantly be asking ourselves, what's the other story? And I grew up at a time where you didn't trust the man. And so I'm always asking, even when I am a part of the man, okay? Even when I'm sitting at the table and we're trying to come up with solutions around diversity or whatever you want to call it, and I'm asking myself, how much of these solutions are simulationist solutions? And how do I call my colleagues and say, I know you're well-intended, and this is a simulationist solution. You're basically telling certain people to leave their identities out the door. That's not diversity. And it's not going to hurt as much as you think it will hurt for us to co-create. As a matter of fact, it makes us stronger. So when we think about it systemically, we can't be afraid to settle for just a slice of the pie. We can't be afraid to speak and say, this doesn't work for me. And to know that that's important to say. Because if it's not working for you, it ain't working for some other folks too. The third thing I think we have to do is we have to do what Curtis said. We have to get involved. And go in and shift and not just feel comfortable. I remember when I received my PhD, I was reminded by an older gentleman in my community in Louisiana, and he challenged me. And he said, baby, you got that PhD. It means you got a lot of book learning. I said, yes, sir. And he said this to me. He said, you remember what Malcolm X said? What do they call a black MD or PhD when you forget your place? And I said, what? He said, nigga. My point is this. I can't think that I'm so separate from those brothers and sisters in Gaza, those brothers and sisters in St. Louis or in Ferguson, those brothers and sisters in wherever they are, that I lose my understanding of my connection with them. That I have to voice this here in Brattleboro in the same way I'd voice it in New York. And I think that part of what we have to do is not lose those connections once we are a part of the system. Because our job is to change it, is to co-create it. And it won't hurt the system to do that. So that's all I'm saying, is that when we make those connections, and sometimes we have to make the connections for people, you know, you have to help, because it is a leap to say, now what does this have to do with Brattleboro? You know, why are we sitting around here sweating in this room? And there's only 10 black folks in Brattleboro. Well, let me tell you why. Because I live in Bellows Falls, and it's probably about 6 of us there. But I tell you why, it does directly relate. It does directly connect. And like the brother said, and like the actor said, you know, it will come back. And we got to understand that connection. And if we don't, if we just keep eating the same pie, drinking the same juice, nothing will change. It'll look a little different, but it'll be the same.
Thank you, Dad.
I was going to weave together the whole metaphor with the spices and Gaza, but it's not going to be better than what Dottie did.
I've got like a more specific, just like a quick specific tying. I think you talked about like the humanity piece, and I think also on the systemic level. For me, one of the important things that's been going on is in 2009, I lived in Oakland, California, and that was when Oscar Grant was shot on New Year's Day at the BART station, and that was the same time when Israel started bombing Gaza very heavily. And there were protests that were happening around police accountability and around ending the bombing of Gaza. And at each rally and each action, they spoke about the connection to the other. And then about 2 years ago, there was an incredible talk in Boston between Angela Davis and Noam Chomsky, and talking about Gaza as the world's largest open-air prison.
That's it. Yeah.
And so for me, the connection here is that we're talking again about prison, we're talking about abolition, and we're talking about creating systems that treat people like humans and like people, and not looking to punish and send people away and send people to die in places. And so for me, the connection between what's going on in Ferguson, what's going on in Gaza, and what's going on in Brattleboro is to see people and treat people like humans, and to create new solutions outside of a prison system, outside of dependency on throwing people away. And again, coming back to this idea of sort of recentering of how do we bring actually those folks that are so that we're so inclined to throw away, bringing them into the center of the conversation. What do you need? What do you need in Gaza? You need water. How do we do that? And not how do we keep you separated? So I think some of the direct connection is looking at prison systems and looking at the way that that manifests in the US, the way that manifests in Gaza, and seeing those connections really help bring it back for me.
We have 3 more questions. So right here, I saw your hand first.
I really like the spice concept here, but I kind of want to switch it around again, because here in Vermont, as a white person, I mean, growing up until I was 17, I met 2 people of color that entire life. So it was a long time before I actually got to engage with anybody on that level. So, and like you said, I can't remember your name, but I so appreciated when you said you're a racist, because I just recently started blogging and all that, and I've been writing about this whole stuff and what it makes me feel as a white person and how I'm supposed to deal with it, and the concept of a cultural DNA being based in racism, it's there. So yes, I too am a racist, and that one of the things that I have to do is to be so incredibly vigilant at all times about my behavior. But because I am white, I can't always see what it is I need to see. So how do I get involved in areas and ways in which my attention can be brought to it? Sheila, I had a discussion with her about microaggression, and she brought it home for me in terms of how to really understand it a little bit better. And really it comes into the idea that, you know, that is the core of that happens because of white privilege. And here I am, I've always dealt with, women's issues, women's issues, and having to transfer it now into realizing, yeah, but I still have a lot more privilege than many other people because of my skin color. And how do I address it? How can I personally address that? And secondary to that, was having a conversation with my daughter about what was happening in Ferguson and New York and all this stuff. And the question was, again, where do we find, everything about our culture is so set to racism. I mean, where do you meet most of the people of color in this town? Well, you got to go hang out in South Main or one of the other low-income housing districts, like Moorcourt, Ledgewood, stuff like that. It's like, our society is set up for it. How do we change it?
Okay, and then, sorry. Oh, Ellen, and then back there.
So, am I next or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I have a comment that I'm hoping that people will respond with your thoughts to. One of the things that I was hearing in the earlier conversation that to me went back to the original iceberg and the institutional racism was this division between it's okay if people protest peacefully, it's not okay if they riot. That was, that division, it also made me think about something that wasn't said in this room, but I've seen in the media about certain children of color being good kids, so they don't deserve what happens to them, but then others being criminals, so maybe they do deserve what happens to them. I'm not saying that was said in this room, but I've seen that in the media. To me, that all has to do with institutional racism, and I feel like that's it's a separation that is like privileging certain people because of either how they're perceived or how they're acting in a public situation, like saying we're going to have a peaceful protest. But it's like, to me, it's that whole divide and conquer thing again, and I'm just interested in any thoughts that any of you on the panel have about that.
My question is where it seems like this conversation is trying to bridge this gap between sort of personal and interpersonal and then these really large institutional levels. And I'm curious because many of us, at least in this room, are employed, which means that we're a part of institutions that are kind of somewhere in that middle ground. And I am curious about, really for some very tangible suggestions of how to bring this conversation to employers, specifically for those of us that work within nonprofit or other work where this is sort of inextricably tied to the mission of our work, and yet also if it's not explicitly named as the mission, then it feels like it's hard to make it be a part of the work because you're busy doing other important things. So I don't know. I'm not being very articulate about this, but I'm curious for some sort of very tangible ways about how to bring this into those institutions where we work that are also systems of power and where all of these same power dynamics are existed, and affect what strategies we're taking then in the communities that we're working in.
So, someone who hasn't recently, Mark, would you want to try to pull together something?
No pressure.
All three of those things? I don't know if I can do
You
that.
want me to repeat anything?
Yeah, would you give me summarize the three?
Brief summaries of how can white people engage, and how do we understand this kind of racist idea that people can protest but not riot. They're good black kids and these bad black kids, and bridge the institutional and the personal, and concrete suggestions for people to have conversations with their employers.
Okay. I think that the first thing to do, and I kind of alluded to it before, and that is just to be comfortable with who you are, comfortable with whatever prejudices that you bring to the table, be aware of them, but don't be afraid of them. Acknowledge that they exist, and then take the uncomfortable steps, even knowing that they're out there. And I think that's true at work as well. I mean, it really all depends on what your employment situation is, but if you have a staff meeting, say that you want to come bring the issue about race or class or something, and you'd like to have a discussion about it in your organization. It's not going to happen in every institution, but I'm sure it's relevant in some of them. It'd be relevant in mine. I'd be happy to bring a discussion like that, and that's okay. But I guess I want to go back. I do want to go back to the spice rack analogy, just because I like it so much, and it's a good metaphor. And I think one thing is I think it's okay if you lose that fear. Don't be afraid of experimenting with different spices. Don't be afraid of experimenting with differences. And don't be afraid that sometimes your recipe is going to be totally messed up. But recognize that like everything in life, we learn from the mistakes that we made from our missteps. And that you will come out ultimately better off just by throwing yourself out there, just by taking those steps. And next time your recipe, will be better, and then it'll be better the next time. So lose that fear. Lose that fear. I know I keep coming back to that same thing, but I think it's really what keeps a lot of us from being active, from joining things, from standing up and saying things that you believe in. And it will allow us to become better cooks. We'll have more flavor in our lives, and we'll have a lot more diversity around us.
Yeah. Just to add just a little piece. When we talk about movement building, we're talking about a really large table. And there's room at the table for all kinds of activists. Not everyone can be great at doing everything at once. So acknowledge that this is the piece that we're going to do. And we're going to dedicate ourselves to that little piece of that. With full confidence that there are other people around the table who are doing things that's moving us sort of forward. So that was the one thing that kind of stuck with me, was that there's a lot of different areas of expertise and competencies and drive, and use those in your spheres of influence that move forward. The second thing is that there is as wide a socio-political thought within communities of color as there are within the general population. Right here in Vermont, we have Randy Brock. How many of you know Randy Brock? Okay, so Randy Brock, Republican, black, ran for governor 2010, didn't make it. A little on the conservative side, former vice president of Fidelity Investments, at sort of one end of the spectrum. And then you have folks that are sitting in this room at the other end of the spectrum, in terms of maybe political thought. Each one of us is different. We have very different experiences. We have very different perspectives. We have a shared experience as being folks of color in the state of Vermont, or folks of color just walking through life. But we are, in fact, different in terms of how we look at the world, how we approach the world, how we walk through the world.
I just want to say one thing to your question about good and bad. That implies a judgment. And it means that we're socially constructed what's good and what's bad. So if I am complying with the status quo, I'm good. If I'm not complying, I'm bad. And I think that we have to reinvent language to talk about these things. So some kids might do, I was talking to Angela earlier, and I said, boy, your sons have great energy. Now that's one way to conceptualize how little children run around and, all loose. I don't have to live with them either, So I can love their energy. But if I say that's bad energy or good energy, I'm basically constructing how that child should be, and then I place that judgment on that child. And I think that happens so often that if it fits the narrative, the dominant narrative, So if I would have written my dissertation in eubonics, I wouldn't be sitting here today. So I had to conform. And what happens when people continue to conform? They lose a sense of themselves, and then we have to reculturate them. And so I think that this whole idea of what's good and what's bad, we have to realize that that's all socially constructed. And usually what's good is constructed by those in positions of power. and then they feed it to the rest of us, and we drink the Kool-Aid like Jim Jones folks did. And it kills us all, just like it did to Jim Jones. Oh, you may not know who Jim Jones was, but look it up. Jim Jones.
Yeah, that's why people say don't drink the Kool-Aid.
Don't drink the Kool-Aid.
I was gonna, can I, for a second?
Yeah.
So, I wanted to answer your question about employment and places that we work. There's a really great resource. I'm not gonna pretend like I have any answers, but I am in the middle of reading a really great book from the Haymarket People's Fund out of Boston. It's called The Courage to Change.
That's a great
it will soon be in our lending library here. But it's all about transforming the power dynamics of an organization. They went from a white-led organization that had an anti-racism mission to actually living that and becoming a women of color led organization. So thinking about those pieces, it's a great resource. I'm working with a few of the clients that I work with around hiring practices, and I think that's a really great place to start, which is how you communicate job openings, how you pay people, who can afford to have certain types of wages, and therefore who are you attracting for your client pool, as well as where are you circulating information. So in terms of places that you work, when there are job openings, paying attention to those pieces with management, with yourself, with how you're doing that in terms of who you're actually bringing in, and talking with folks that aren't in your organization and say, where do you look for job openings? Like, where are the places that we should post this? And again, that's that recentering versus inclusion, not saying, how do we get more people to be like us here, but what do we have to do around the culture here? And sometimes it's changing a culture before folks are gonna come in and creating that openness. So acknowledging that piece. And also, I think, I just want to acknowledge, Curtis, I think I really like what you're saying. And I think one of the things in response to what can white folks do is get your own goddamn analysis. What the analysis paralysis is, I think for me, I spent a lot of time not being able to move and do things because I was waiting for someone else to tell me what to do in a way, and I'm going to balance this, but that not all folks of color think the same thing. And as white folks, I think we're often paralyzed by wanting that to be true, by wanting to do the right thing and make everyone happy, make all folks of color happy with what we do. And so picking your analysis and picking what your action is and how you understand the world and going with it, and getting that from folks of color, but also knowing that not everyone has the same analysis. And as white folks, like, we have to give up that thought that we're gonna please everyone, that we're gonna be perfect and that we're gonna be right. And so really committing ourselves to something basic and going with that and being clear on that. And getting that analysis from folks of color. What are you gonna say?
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But this whole idea of having to get it right, that's a white supremacist view.
Yeah.
Do you realize that?
Yeah.
Because it's almost,
No, I agree. No, I agree.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm trying to say, like, we're not gonna get it right. Like, pick something, do something, and like stop looking to other people to answer our own questions, which is, what is your commitment? What are you gonna do? And what do you at your heart you believe in? And where do you see humanity in people, and how can you commit to that? Not how can you be right about pleasing everyone. Sorry, different words, but
I know facility, I'm not supposed to say anything, but I'm going to say something really quickly. I want to thank you all. And that's that, not that long ago, I was standing outside and there was a homeless woman who was a black woman, and she had a cat on a leash, and she had all of her stuff, and people were yelling at her about the cat. You're dragging the cat, pick up the cat. And one of my friends walked over to her and said, are you okay? And she said, if anyone cared as much about me as they do about this damn cat, I wouldn't be living on the goddamn streets. And so it's like, of course we should care about this woman more than we care about the cats. But the other thing is, we have to remember, we named the system, but we didn't name what it is, that the capitalist system necessitates profits and impoverishes people. And keeps them in prison. And necessitates racism. And all the other oppressions that we live under. And so I think one of the other steps that we haven't done yet is to name it and say what it is. And say, I'm against capitalism, and capitalism should be dismantled.
Thank you.
So in that vein,
it's such a pathology. The pathology of oppression. I was at the kennel at the vet with my dogs, and I happen to have 2 black dogs. And on the wall, this is the honest to God truth. I have a picture of it because I had to take a picture of this card. That they were encouraging people to adopt black dogs because black dogs are more often killed. That's a pathology, y'all. So we have to understand this pathology. I don't want to go, I didn't mean to take us back, but we have to understand that that's pathological. To take it to that degree, I had never seen that before in my life. If you don't believe me, it's at the Walpole Vet Clinic. And I have a picture of it. I can show you the card of them encouraging you to adopt black dogs. That's the pathology that we are living with, not only in ourselves, but within the larger system in general. And it's hurting us all, not just the black dogs.
Right.
So I beg you to take it on as your own. Don't do it for me. Don't do it for Biko. Don't do it for my nieces and nephews. Do it for you and your children and your grandchildren.
And yourself.
And yourself. I'm asking you to do that. And I wanted to say that before we left. And I'm sorry I talked so much, but no, I'm not.
all right. So then, I'm sorry. I wish we did. We would be here all night. We really want to respect people's time. And this is a wonderful conversation, and I know there are questions that didn't get asked, but you have to pull people aside afterwards and ask them. So.
I have something really important to say. I'm asking for the space to say it, please.
Is it really?
It's very important. I'm asking you to trust me.
Oh.
No, I am. I'm asking you to trust me. So, I'm asking for the space.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So, this is meant in no disrespect to the panelists or anyone else in the room, but it's been hard to sit and listen to this wonderful afternoon of people sharing their stories and their experiences without hearing an indigenous voice represented or even mentioned, or the ideas, the concepts of what a life would be like if this were still Turtle Island. If an indigenous person walked in and started speaking their language, none of us that I can see would understand anything they were saying to us. And this is meant in no disrespect to our panelists here. In fact, Sister Dottie, I appreciate many of the things you've said because you've opened the door to that. But it's hard for me, with indigenous family of my own, and as a member of a warrior society, to sit and listen because our ideas are so constrained. White privilege began in 1492, and the resistance to that white privilege began in 1492. And so maybe the Abenaki people, the Pennacook, or the Mohawk were invited, and they declined to be here. I don't know. But what I do know is that our idea space of how to solve this issue of white privilege and racism has been constrained today because there's not an indigenous person representing their understanding of colonialism and decolonizing this idea of racism that's been on the panel today. And I appreciate you giving me the space to say that because I've been wanting to jump out of my skin the whole time to say that, and I've been waiting and hoping that someone would bring it up. And Sister Dottie mentioned Winona LaDuke and her idea of like, don't ask to include us in a table that we don't even want to be a part of. Because this American system is the occupier. It is the occupier. And this gentleman, the retired police officer, you're a part of the occupying army. And until we all see that, and as long as we participate in the American project, we will always be settlers and occupiers, no matter what our origins are. And that's the idea space that we haven't even been able to get into today. And I understand because you're sharing things from your communities and what you need and the great work that you've been doing. But our idea space has been constrained because those perspectives have not been included today. So thank you for giving me the space to say that.
That's a connection with Gaza. Just what he said.
That's right. That's right.
So I don't know how you all feel. I need like 15 seconds just to think to myself. And so maybe we can just have it a little bit quiet in here. Not that you can't talk. For a few seconds. And then you'll have a chance to talk to the people around you about what just happened. And both Dottie and Curtis, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Anna, kind of referenced like what could we do in different words. And so think about what you're willing to do. What is your piece in it? Because that's the next discussion as we push forward. All right, so if you want to just take a few, like 2 minutes to talk to someone around you about what you thought about or something else, like what are you willing to do? What is your piece in this?
I am going to stop when someone is pulled over, even though we were threatened by the police not to do so.
Right.
You know, I mean, I think it was keep a distance. That's what I heard.
Maybe not on the highway.
Yeah.
Right.
Or when it's dark.
Yeah. Keep a distance.
Right.
I'm going to take the advice of Tatiana and bring it to schools and try to incorporate this conversation with teachers and the students.
Someone else?
I'm going to keep as a teacher, using restorative justice in the places where I work and refusing to acknowledge that there are good people and bad people.
Connect struggles of queer and trans people to struggles of people of color and other folks around the world.
I want to start asking seriously, based on this old joke, like call a hippie if you're robbed. I actually want to start asking, how can we call one another and what sources do we have besides going to the police?
Right?
Yeah.
I want to get to know the police in my town of Rockingham and Bellows Falls.
Yes, particularly Rocky.
I want to continue to study and learn about the system of capitalism in order to make the change.
I'm going to try to remember that we're all on this iceberg and all at different levels, and that people who are at different levels than me and I might disagree with ideologically are not my enemy, and that we're all just trying to figure this out together.
I'm going to invest more in building relationships and not in winning conversations. I just ain't going to do it, I think I'm going to invest. Work on it.
I just think that it's really important, and I heard you guys touched on it in all your presentations or discussions, but not to be a bystander. You know, you talk about things that happen in employment. When people make a discussion, and the SNAP Collective did it with the Spark, sorry. Did it in their thing about not being a bystander. If someone, if someone says a racist thing, or if someone says a sexist thing, or homophobic, or whatever you're against as a human being, which, we're all here, we're all on the same iceberg. But just to stand up for it and not get in an argument, but start a discussion, because many people are just innocently ignorant, especially students who are white, and they'll say things that they hear from their families and whatnot, but to have a conversation and to read things from people of color and educate ourselves, because white people have no idea what it's like to be a person of color, basically.
I'm going to remember not to be afraid next time I take an airplane and
And also, like before, like I'm taken to the secondary inspection room to be judged because I'm Latino.
I'm gonna try to understand what skills and resources I already have that I can offer to organizations and movements that are already doing work that I really respect.
Volunteer with the Root to help do some community outreach.
Bingo.
And also work within the public school systems to get administrators and teachers more training on how to be understand how the system ruins lives and how they can do their classrooms restorative.
Being one of those teachers in the public school system and one of those people who's always learning, keep learning with my students the historical and material context of what we see happening in our community, how it connects to the world, and how we can work towards building a better world for all of us everywhere.
Thank you, everyone. That's an awesome list of ideas, and I'm sure there's many more in this room. Thank you for the depth and really the thoughtful consideration. We have a few things here that are happening. We're going to pass around some things that you can fill out and put in this basket as you walk out the door. Here, let's start passing them out, and then I'll read what they are. So there will be a local action planned for January 9th in Brattleboro. Stay tuned for details. You can, if you mark on here, we will contact you so that you will know about that event. There's also a workshop for white folks happening. The date on here is not correct. It's actually February. So keep that in mind. Also, same, if you mark there, you'll be contacted about that event or workshop. And then there will be a monthly study group for white folks starting on dismantling racism. You know, all those clubs like Curtis was talking about.
Get that analysis.
And at the same time, it's all actions like Alex was talking about. We need it all. So here's a few things that are happening, and we will take this list that was brainstormed today, and we'll put this on our website and on our Facebook page and be inspired by it and keep acting. And there's so much to do. We are all on that boat together, and we have to act so that we can. We've been hit up against that iceberg for 500 years, and it's time for us to like break that iceberg down, people.
Let it go.
So fill this out, leave it in the basket on your way out the door. Also, please leave a donation for us to thank the people involved in this forum, and a resource list. And there is a resource list that we put together on readings, who to support financially, coming out of the actions coming out of Ferguson, and some videos to watch. Yeah, so please check out that resource list that's on our webpage and Facebook page. And before we go, everyone stand up, grab a hand. Grab two hands.
I knew raise someone else's hand. I knew we
We're going to have a moment of silence again to feel our collective love, our collective energy, the collective struggle, and feel the energy that's moving through our hands from body to body, from heart to heart, and let's take this energy with us as we go from here today. Let's change it up, y'all.